Hello, this is Ryan Riccitelli with asnews.net, and today I have a special guest, Paul Menta. He's one of the gurus of the sport when it comes to instruction, and he's also helped pioneer a lot of kite schools around the world. And so the best person to probably introduce himself is Paul. So Paul, why don't you say hello to everybody?
Hey man, how's it going? I guess some information about me. I've just become an old man. I just turned 40 years old. I got into the sport when I turned 30 years old, so it made it kind of interesting because I had a different perspective than being 19 when I was into wakeboarding and everything else. And now it's kind of led on to a full-time business, which I never thought it would in the beginning. And it's taken me a lot of different places and pretty much all the way around the world almost 3 times. Now, what am I going to do at 40? Well, I'm just kind of looking back because this sport's retro and right back to what it was when I was 30 years old. So it's making it kind of interesting to take the same view all over again, maybe for the next 10 years.
Well, I met you on Maui in, I think, 2000, and you were running one of the schools over there, and I think it was a Wipika school. And, since then, why don't you talk about some of the spots that you've traveled to?
Maui was kind of funny because, I at that point, I got involved in the sport in 96, flew a kite ski that Corey had. I then was still wakeboarding and was still a little stuck up on the wakeboarding and was like, this is too much trouble. And then 97, 98, they came with the inflatables. I had already flown traction kites on the snow back then, so that was kind of cool, and I kind of saw the possibilities of it all. And so I went out and I formed a site called Kite Surf the Earth. My idea was to go kite surf around the earth and go share experiences and see what was going on, because basically nobody understood the sport, nor did I. So I was like, try to figure it out. After I got done, I was like, well, Maui's the place I got to be, because to me it was like, I always called it Kite Vietnam, because it was just insane out there to try to teach, and the winds were so strong, and you're learning every day. So that was probably the most influential spot. I opened up a school at the bottom of the beach where nobody wanted to be, and kind of started out and got going. We were on 2-line kites. I remember days teaching on 2-meter kites. I mean, it was just having people get up on the board for the first time on 2-meter kites. So it was pretty insane, and I probably learned more there than I did anywhere in the world.
Well, and that was a real springboard for, and the growth of some of the instructional that's actually gone on to become PASA and a.k.a. And why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, because at that point, I saw the possibilities that the sport was going to grow, and I also saw that I wanted to do it in Key West, but I also like doing it in Maui and possibly some other places. So I had guys coming to me that wanted to work for me, and I just really didn't know what I was going to do to train them. So I kind of wrote my own book, and just kind of figured it out. And here's what I showed after, 200 students, the problems and how you can teach them and stuff. And then kind of other people were on the same idea, and Wipika had the same thing. So they asked me to kind of jump on board, and, we collaborated and got a good instructional program going, and it was, the first instructional program around. And we kind of made that kind of happen, and next thing you know, PASA was out there. They had just formed there in their early stages, and as Wipika started to kind of back off and go in a different direction, I stepped into PASA because they were looking for somebody to come over and kind of take charge and rewrite the books and add some more information. So that's how I got involved with PASA.
Well, and with that said, I mean, you've been responsible for actually been the master instructor at PASA and signing off on and teaching a lot of instructors to instruct.
Yeah, you'd be surprised, even now, to watch half these guys or most of them that are out there competing, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago. I kind of watched them all start out, and now they're, the rock stars of the sport, which is kind of cool. You earn a different respect level from people, so everybody kind of, they give me a hard time, but they kind of cut me some slack as well, because, they know I've been there for a while, and maybe I don't choose the same path as everybody else trying out stuff. And, you screw out trying stuff, and then next thing you know, you hit on something really cool, and then everybody's giving you credit for it. So, you can go from being a complete loser and screwing everything up in this sport to, everybody going, wow, man, that's such a great idea. So I guess that's how it works.
Well, and with that said, you've also seen a lot of equipment, and you've seen the progression of equipment, and why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, the sport started out as 2-line, and, I was a really hardcore wakeboarder, and, I love riding in my bindings and stuff like that, and pretty much going from a surfboard to a surfboard with straps, and being frustrated on going upwind to, for myself, I'm going back on my bindings and learning that way. and watching two-line just so powerful. It made the sport so powerful because you didn't really have a way of depowering except for edging. Switching to four-line and the resistance that everybody had going on the four-line. And then kind of developing some techniques and everybody kind of pushing the envelope a little bit with it and really making the sport grow. And now, up until now, where we're at the same phase again, in 2006, it's, it's out there, and, it's the same growing pain again, but people are realizing that the general public wants the sport to be made easier and safer, and these bow kites lend safe and performance. So, it's kind of neat to watch it retro back all again and kind of start all over.
Well, and, we are at the bow kites and flat kites, SLE, depending on who you talk to, and there's a lot of people who define these types of kites in a different way, but you've been really instrumental in working with Cabrinha on the bow kites, and why don't you tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing down there in Key West?
Basically, what we've been doing is you're going to see a new kite coming out called the Contra. It's basically a light wing kite. My whole stand in this sport has always been, Maui's great, the Canaries are great, even, like guys over in Texas or, you just get cranking wind. But the majority of the places they kite only get, average wind speed is about 15 miles an hour. And you need a kite that dictates that kind of wind speed, but also has the power, the jumping ability, and the performance. So we've been really taking it out and busting it out on this Contra, and it's actually going to be released May 1st. It's all fine-tuned. And the one neat thing I like about it is that we've spent so much time R&D in it and really, taking all the bugs and the kinks out of it before it gets in the consumer's hands. Because the bow kites came on the market pretty fast, initially, and everybody says there's some problems with inverting and stuff like that. And, these kind of kites with this profile, I don't care what you say. If you push the bar all the way out and you go into a crash, you're going to invert those kind of kites because they're such a high-performance kite. Now we're going to kind of, blend the performance aspect with what people are looking for to kind of fine-tune it and smooth it out. So, I'm kind of psyched for these to come out and for the next generations of kites. And even with Cabrinha, just because, that's where some of the bills are paid and everything, they don't give me a hard time. I like going out and flying everybody's kites. And I've never had a problem with that. I mean, Slingshot, GK, like all the different kite companies out there have been very friendly to always let me go out there and fly because I'm more interested in the teaching and the foundation of the sport, and if everybody's on the same page and this stuff's going to work. So, everybody's kind of respected my feedback, and that's been kind of a cool thing. It's kind of nice to have other people, you got to pay the bills and you stick with one thing, but you can't be closed-minded in the sport.
Well, and I think you're very correct when you say that, and I think a lot of my listeners, they are at a point where they're looking at the flat kites. The ones who bought them are really happy to have them, but like, what would you say to that listener who is contemplating, hey, I've got $2,000 into my sea kites, $5,000 into my sea kites, I just can't afford to cross over? I mean, what do you say to that person?
I mean, tear it up. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the sea kites. This is a progression point in the sport where it's the new kind of trend, and I told people the same thing when they had two-line kites. Fortunately, two-line kites could be converted into four-line kites, so there wasn't a big deal. I don't see sea kites being converted into, the bow-style kites because the leading edge and the trailing edge have the same contour, so you have a different complete animal with the bridle. But tear it up. I mean, at some point, you're going to go out and try one. I don't count them out. And, change sucks. Anybody that wants to change, and it's such a hard thing to get somebody to change. I had to force myself, whatever it was, a year and a half ago, to start riding these bow kites and put away my sea kites. And I got to admit, the first couple weeks, I was like, I just don't, these kites aren't working right, or this isn't doing that right. And what I came to a conclusion of that I wasn't working right. It's a different fly, it's a different jump, and now that I understand it, it's taking it to a new realm. I mean, getting bowed by a wave, pushing out on the bar, dropping in on a wave, and all of a sudden I'm surfing, boosting like stupidly high, coming in hot when I normally just about break the board and be able to depower. I mean, it's really interesting, and I'm really psyched with it. But, for most people, change is a bit difficult and pricey, so there's going to be so many demos going on this year, man. Go out and try this stuff, and take your time with it.
Well, personally, my local crew around here, they give me shit because they call me the bow guy. And, hey, I'm 100% convinced. I mean, there are a lot of things that I can't do on a bow kite that I maybe could do on a sea kite. But most importantly, I'd say my fun factor has increased, 200%, and probably just my confidence. I mean, down here in Texas, it blows, in the high 30s, and when you're out in the high 30s on a sea kite, you can definitely get your ass handed to you. And I've been on a 7, and I've never been more confident and jumped higher. And as I always tell my friends, I jump high and I wiggle. That's kind of the joke, but I mean that's my personal experience with them. And
yeah, how about ride time? I mean, let's say you're out on your 7 and because it's blowing like 25 to 30, and all of a sudden it drops down to like 20 now or 19. These kites have such a range that you can still work the kites. You're not coming in and re-rigging a kite. And you're not exhausted. I mean, everybody discusses bar pressure. I mean, I was with Damien Leroy 2 weeks ago, and he was taking the bow kites. And you're going to see him and a couple of these other guys lead the charge. I mean, he was throwing, just 540 mows, S-bends the blind, and I mean, just really, really good. He did a couple tricks that we both still don't understand. We're starting to look at the film. So he was just like, I can't believe I just hit that. It's a point that you gotta force and figure out where you dial it in, and it's going to be different. Sea kites are going to have a different angle on a loaded trick than a bow kite is. But now that they're kind of pushing some of the bar pressure off, which you're going to see, that's going to be a big factor this year, that they're going to push bar pressure off. But my whole point was with the bow kites is don't take too much of it off, because I have a bar and I have a setup that makes no bar pressure on the kite at all, 0. But I tell you, it's really hard to figure out where the kite is because it's so light in your hand. So, you can't satisfy everybody, but the majority seems to want a moderate bar pressure. And then I think if some of these other guys that are out there, like Damien and Ruben and everybody else that are leading the charge on the pro circuit, you'll see them start to use it. All of a sudden, you'll see a big changing of the guard with the bow kites.
Well, and I'm from California, Carlsbad, California, and I come from a strong surfing background. And I mean, I took the 7 out in like 30 knots side off wind, and I mean, it was unbelievable to be able to go down the line and just, basically push out on the bar, and I could actually surf down the line on the wave. And I mean, to me, that's where I was truly sold on the bow kites.
Yeah, I mean, for me as well, I'm 165 pounds. And to be able to pass off my kite in 19 miles an hour, 18 miles an hour to somebody that's 115. My buddy's girlfriend came up and was like, oh, I really want to go out right now and go for a ride. And she goes out and takes the 12 from me. She's 110 pounds. We're both riding the same kite. She's just keeping the bar a little farther, depowering, but totally in control, gets done and just dumps the bar and kills the kite. So that's pretty cool, unless it's your wife or your girlfriend and she's stealing your gear now. I don't know.
Well, and I don't want to be all rah to the flat bow kite, SLE kites. I mean, there are a lot of great, sea kites that are still out there, and hybrid sea kites that are evolving more towards a flatter profile, and such as like the North Vegas, and I think Slingshot has their kite too, that really, focuses on that market. Have you had any chance flying any of those kites?
Oh, for sure, because, I mean, the Vegas, that Cabrinha has the revolver. All of a sudden, right at the end, it's like, of course, right before we come into the next generation of stuff, everybody completely starts using, content from that and making the sea kites completely dialed in. So it's really, but I'm finding that's more on a performance end, or really on handle passes and a lot of different, high-performance trick ends, kite loops and stuff. But, I think you're going to see everybody kind of crossing into this just because of, I'll give you the big thing for Joe Average out there, or for me. Light wind and relaunching. These kites relaunch on the dime. It's no effort. You can toss them in the water. You can do whatever you want to get them to launch, and it just opens up the field of where you can go out and ride at. So I think usability is going to be the biggest factor in the bow kites. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the sea kites. I mean, I've been on every kite. I've been on kites that somebody experimented with one line. And I'll tell you what, it all comes down to how good the rider is. You could take me, or you can take somebody great. You could go take Lou, and you could put Lou on a one-line kite or on a 10-line kite. Still a good rider, still going to be able to kill it. So, all this still comes down to how good the rider is, and then the kite is just a performance or an accessory for him.
Well, why don't we switch gears here a little bit and talk about what you're doing down there in Key West, and then also now you've got the Turks and Caicos. Yeah,
Turks and Caicos is, you're not going to hear me talk a ton about that, because, man, I've just found such good wave spots down there. It's gotten so dialed in. And I was looking for another place in the Caribbean to go. The whole idea with the kite house thing is that I like having places to go. You know, some places like down here in Key West, the kite house is a 40-foot houseboat. In the Bahamas, it's a house. In Miami, it's another boat out in the water. In Turks and Caicos, it's actually going to be a little development that I'm building and stuff like that because I bought property there. But Turks is just, you know, you got to love the Caribbean, and that's what I like about this sport now. Everybody's figuring out that there's a ton of places to go. And I got a chance to take some of the guys out there and go wave riding. And it was pretty neat, not to you know, blow the horn for the boat kites again, but it was side offshore. You know, the wind was really light one day, and it was really heavy the next, and we were dropping into just, I mean, you know, 3-4 foot overhead barrels, and it was just incredible, you know, and beautiful out there. And really nice. Don't see a lot of sharks out there either, so that's kind of a big plus for me and stuff, you know. It is becoming a shark time of year over on the East Coast, so, you know, where they just start blending around and stuff. But
yeah, the sharks down in when I spent a lot of time down in the Keys, and I think the scariest thing for me was when I'd come across the channel and then you'd see the big shadow of the bull shark.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny. I mean, you know, they're just kind of generally passing through, and you don't have a big deal, you know. You got to just watch more when you're up on the coastal end, just like anywhere else. That this time of year, you know, all the different fish are running and stuff like that, so they come in closer and stuff. It doesn't seem like they ever bother really the kiters. It's just, you know, it's the baiters out there or the people fishing with like a bait sack hanging out of their pocket, standing in, you know, waist deep water that are having the problem. But you know, I'm sure if we saw half the stuff that was underwater, you know, we wouldn't exactly be there all the time. And I think that's what's great about the Turks and Caicos, because the water's so clear. Unfortunately, you get to see everything. We were kiting this one spot, and the reef was definitely pulling up a little bit dry, and you're kiting by, looking down, going, "Oh man, I do definitely not want to hit that."
You know, there a couple years ago at the Isla Morada Invitational, Bree Kamel was down there, and she got blown downwind, and she was floating across the channel, and I mean, she was in tears when she came back to the contest, and she got chased out of the water by a shark. Like,
yeah, Bree's kind of always been oh man, you know, she's a cute little girl, man. Shark's coming up, trying to score a little bit, and you know, Bree was probably taunting the shark on initially, and then, you know, got chased out. That sounds like more the scenario for her.
Well, you know, in another note, you've also played a major role in the snow kiting, and just, I remember, you know, several years back you went over to Europe, and why don't you give me your perspective on snow kiting? Yeah,
snow kiting it's kind of a weird animal. It I mean, I actually snow kited before I ever kited on the water, and that was like 94, 95. I just saw a couple guys. They were like, "Hey, check this out." We were on snowboards, and they were pulling themselves around, and we were trying some stuff. It was really cool. But I went over, yeah, the guys in Europe really had it dialed in, you know, right from the beginning, because I guess they had more snow time than they really had, you know, water and wind time, generally in, like, you know, the northern parts of France and the Alps and the Seminoles and stuff. And, man, it's all of a sudden just finally boomed off. I mean, I went out last year and hit all the competitions and just kind of wanted to go do my thing. I figured, well, you know, I'm sure I'm going to get my ass kicked by a, you know, 17 or 18-year-old. And I found out that it was more people in their late 20s and 30s into the sport of the snow cutting end of it. And now all of a sudden this year you see everybody heading out there, and there's all these kids out there that are just killing it because, you know, I guess for the U.S., you know, speaking solely in the U.S., there's a lot more places that get snow that don't have mountains than get snow that do. So people are setting up kickers and sliders, and it's kind of bringing all the fun parts of the sport. And you really don't need as much wind, so it's a lot user-friendly. But if I'll give you one big piece of advice, man, if you're coming from kiting on the water and you like to boost big air, and you go out and just huck it on the snow and boost the big air, you're going to be in for a big surprise, man. There's a couple good books to read on hang gliding and paragliding, and I definitely would read them because, I mean, it's not unlikely for you to send it off the side of a hill and go up 60, 70 feet in the air. You don't know how to come down. You're just like a splat when it's all over with.
Well, you know, what's on the agenda for Paul Menta now? For, you know, we're heading into the season, and why don't you give us a heads up on your schedule?
My schedule's basically we're finishing filming a movie in a high-definition TV. We want to have that ready because we want to have one of the first high-def TV, you know, things out there. So we're going to finish that up. I got a little more shooting to do with Clinton Bolton and Damien Leroy. And it's going to be like a travel/really heavy action thing. And it's going to show you where you can go in kiting and the options you have to do out there. And basically, I'm really just going to charge ahead with this Bowtech thing and really focus on making sure that it's, you know, completely dialed in. I'm probably going to travel around a little bit and go do some clinics and stuff and let everybody see what's going on with the bow kites and, you know, hopefully dispel any myths and, you know, pick up some new ideas for myself as well. And then just kind of go out, hit the Caribbean, you know. I mean, I haven't been to Cape Hatteras for a while. I want to head over there. I want to go back over to Hawaii. Just kind of pop around and see what's news going on and, you know, see what everybody else is doing, because it's that time again where you go out and you get to learn a little bit yourself. And actually, I want to have some fun.
Well, and, you know, we gotta, I'm sorry, I fucked up. You know, Paul, we gotta wrap up, and so I just want to give you a chance to give a shout-out to whomever you want to give a shout-out to.
Yeah, I just definitely, I just like to thank my crew, AJ in the Bahamas, Mike and Clarissa in Miami, you know, Nick down in Key West, all the people that kind of let me go out and do what I do and push the sport and maybe push the sport a little further without being stuck, you know, all the time, 100% teaching and stuff. Those guys are absolutely great. And you know, a big thank you to Tony Brady. And I hope this year he takes a little more vacation. He spends a lot of time on the velocity games and everything else out there in the sport, and he's just such a stand-up guy. And, you know, if you see Tony out there anywhere, make him come to your spot and go ride, because when you're at his spot and you ride, he's just an awesome guy.
Tony is a great guy. Tony's the guy behind Zero Gravity Kiteboarding, and one of the main guys who's really led the charge to bring the velocity games back to what it used to be. And hey,
yeah, he's never let that vision go, dude. I mean, it was the only reason I ever did it and everything. Tony's just, you know, I mean, it all comes down to some stuff with Peter Norby, and it was his vision, and a bunch of other people have stepped in there and done what they could to keep the vision alive and everything. And it's with people like Tony in it, man. It's just been awesome.
Well, Paul, you know, where can people find out more information on, you know, the Kite House and what you're doing?
Basically, thekitehouse.com can give you all the information. I actually have blogs up on there now for the Bowtech and everything else like that. So there's a ton of information on that. And, you know, they can contact us or just say, hey, or a lot of people just go on to say, hey, I'm going kiting in this spot. Do you know anybody there? You know, it's not all about just the money for us. It's more about the lifestyle. You know, and if you ask us where to go and kite and who's there, don't worry, we're going to find out where you are and one day show up and say, hey, remember us? Why don't you hook us up now?
Well, hey, man, I really appreciate you spending the time with us today and giving us a heads up on, you know, bow kites and what's going on in the mental world. And we'll be trying to get you back on the show, you know, regularly, because I think you have a lot of good things to tell people, and you're always traveling around. So thanks a lot, Paul.
Cool, man. Thanks, Ryan. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, bye-bye. Hello, this is Ryan Riccitelli with asnews.net, and today we have a very special guest, Jason Slezak. Slezy J is his nickname, and the best person to introduce him is probably himself. So, Jason, why don't you introduce yourself?
What's up? My name is Jason Slezak. Just hanging out back here in Hatteras, Wave, North Carolina, which is where I call home for a good part of the year. And just got back from winter training and have been working on some kite testing and just kind of getting back to spring and summertime here in Hatteras.
Well, and you've been doing a lot of traveling lately, you know, and you're just had a new board release, and why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've been working on a board basically since last July with Jimmy Redmond, who is a well-known wakeboard shaper for Liquid Force. He, you know, has been in the wakeboard industry shaping, you know, twin-tip wakeboards for years, and has dabbled a bit in shaping their kiteboards over the years with, you know, kind of help from other shapers, mainly because he didn't have the time to do it. And we came up with a board in two sizes, a 138 and a 144, called the Mission, which is basically one of the first boards that Jimmy, you know, we started from scratch, sitting at a computer and with a completely blank piece of foam, and, you know, created something that's a little different. You know, took some of his concepts that he's used in wakeboarding and suited them a bit better for kiteboarding, and took a lot of the different ideas from boards that I've been riding over the years and concepts that I wanted to come up with, and kind of put her into something new for liquid force.
Well, and you have a real strong skate, snowboard, and surf background, and you definitely push it in the kiteboarding on all different levels, on the snow, on the water, on the rails and the waves. And like, what kind of person is this board made for?
Well, basically, I think in kiteboarding, over the past couple of years, everything's gone very small as far as high-end boards. You had your larger boards for people to learn on, and then it went instantly jumped down to these really small boards, in the 120 to 130 range. Personally, I'm a bigger guy. I'm 6'1" and weigh about 200 pounds, and I just really found that I was kind of too big for all the boards, and not just me, but I think a lot of the riders tend to go really small on their board, and then they need to be really overpowered and ride a big kite and things like that. So basically the concept was to come up with a board that planed off early, was a bit longer and a bit wider than kind of what the industry standard has been, which also allows you to go with a slightly smaller kite, so you don't need to be super jacked all the time. But it also, for wake style tricks or wave riding, anything like that, it gives you more board under your feet so that you're not constantly sinking the board if you don't have pull from the kite. If you're independently riding the wave or landing from a wake trick or a rail and need a little bit of board under your feet to plane off on, you're not constantly digging the nose or sinking. And then that was the main board I'm riding is the 138, kind of as my everyday board. And then I also wanted a board for, the intermediate level rider. Like I said before, I see a lot of the bigger boards that are there for beginners, and then people are kind of shoved onto stuff that are too small, so they progress really quickly, and then all of a sudden their progression stops because now they're just struggling to get going. So I just wanted something that, for me, would work in light wind, and then for your, average either light wind or intermediate rider, they could jump onto, a quality produced board and get out there and still progress.
Well, and I think a lot of our listeners don't realize that you are one of the top dudes over there at Real Kiteboarding. You've taught hundreds of people to get on the water, and how has that helped you in, designing a board like this?
Well, it's cool. Yeah, I've been working with Real since the beginning in 2001, and was teaching even prior to that, prior to Real's existence, and have been teaching kiteboarding now for over 6 years. And it was a really big help because you get to see what boards people have success on and what boards people struggle with. So it was a major help, kind of seeing what was missing from the industry and also what was needed. And even with the 138 that I've had, it's only been out of the press as far as the production goes for a few weeks now. I've already been able to put a ton of different level riders on it, from lightweight guys that only weigh 130 or 140 pounds to riders who are kind of just progressing down from like a big 160 or 170 board, and I've seen people really like the board and really ride well on it.
Well, and I think a lot of people are curious too. I mean, you ride a lot of rails, you ride in the waves, you ride a lot of like wake style flat water stuff, and I've seen you switch back and forth between foot straps and boot bindings, and like, what's your take on that?
Personally, I come from a snowboard background, and the bindings when I first started out always were really comfortable. Over the years, I think, the majority of the market and the industry has gone to foot straps, and I think that's the reality for a lot of people. I personally do like to jump back and forth pretty regularly just to mix it up and keep things, new and just different. So mainly I'll choose what I ride based on, what I want to do or what I'm feeling for the day. Another thing is I'm a pretty accident-prone person. I've, had some serious injuries over the years, so the foot straps are a little bit easier on my body. So I'm going out on days when I'm a little beat up from sessioning hard, I'll get back into foot straps. But mainly for kickers and sliders and rails and stuff, I really like to be in the bindings. The board's always with you. It's really solid. Anytime I'm going to run myself at a solid structure in the water, I like knowing that the board's going to stay with me. And foot straps, I think, just for me, provide a little more freedom. Like when it's light wind and you can really kind of move your feet around on the board to get maybe a little bit more upwind angle on the board, or especially for wave riding, wanting to either be toe side longer or just wanting to once again be able to kind of have freedom and move your feet around. I like the foot straps in the waves and in the lighter winds, and then the bindings when I'm more lit up and riding rails and sliders and kickers and stuff.
And a lot of people, they probably haven't seen the clip, but you can get it. It's in the Liquid Force Relentless video. But have you taken that crazy, crazy crash on the camel toe, and you literally broke your back on that?
Yeah, I hit the camel toe, full rider error, swung on the upwind side of it, and was a little stubborn and tried to hold on too long, and ended up fracturing 3 vertebrae and 2 ribs. So it was kind of a unfortunate wake-up call that it's much easier just to let go than get the ride to the hospital.
Well, and you're talking a little bit about, straps and boot bindings, and you're also, you ride the strapless and you ride a surfboard. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was kind of crazy. I don't know, maybe it was in like winter of 2002 or, yeah, probably winter of 2002. I had gone to Puerto Rico we do an annual photo shoot for Real Kiteboarding, where we kind of test all the gear that Real sells and get our images for marketing stuff for the year. And I had borrowed a small surfboard off of somebody while I was down there.
Sorry, dude. I'm so sorry. Fucking, I drank coffee and went down the back. Fucking. Oh man. I was trying to hold it back, and I was about ready to turn blue. All right, I'll re-intro that real quick. We'll just fully redo that question.
All right.
Well, Jason, you talked about foot straps and boot bindings, and I've also seen you ride strapless, and why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, as far as strapless riding goes, I went down to Puerto Rico a couple years ago and borrowed a small surfboard off of somebody, and it just kind of messed around for the couple weeks that I was there on riding the surfboard. But it was a pretty lightly glass board, and I did some serious heel denting in it and kind of trashed. I mean, it was a board that was already broken and fixed, so the person didn't care that it was trashed. That's kind of why they let me borrow it. And then from then, I only had glass boards, and I would take them out and kind of work through them pretty quickly. And then a couple years ago, when I just talked about breaking my back, Matt and Tripp, who are the owners and co-founders of Real Kiteboarding, after I broke my back, they kind of saw that I needed something to get back out on the water and kind of push me to get out there on a surfboard again. It was a lot less impact and was a little easier for me to go out. It was kind of hard to go out with straps or bindings on and resist the urge to jump or do stuff that was going to create a lot of impact. So started riding the surfboard, in the waves, and was just instantly hooked. Found that it just made me, it makes you have to be balanced a lot more, and it makes the small, lighter wind days fun again. When you'd normally be just kind of struggling to get on a plane, all of a sudden you're ripping around, riding upwind, having fun. And since then, it's just kind of been one of my main focuses. As far as in Hatteras, we're pretty lucky where we have flat water on one side and waves on the other, so depending on what the conditions are good for, it's kind of an easy decision on what to go out and ride. So, and beyond that, I've done a lot of traveling over the past year to a bunch of different wave spots where, if the surf's good and the wind's up, you can basically do your own personal tow-in. You're towing yourself into insane surf, and if it's kind of weird, section-y kind of surf, all of a sudden you have the kite to get around sections that you couldn't get around surfing, and it just opens up tons of new places to session and new waves to ride.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit and start talking about kites. You have a lot of different kites to ride in the Liquid Force line, and what do you recommend?
Liquid Force right now has 3 different kites out: the M80 and the Menace, which are traditional C-shape, fifth line kites, and the Assault, which is kind of a second generation bow kite. you know, I personally ride all of them. You know, I find that the M80s are a little lower aspect, a little more forgiving for somebody who's learning, you know, a bit easier to relaunch and all the characteristics of a lower aspect kite. You know, the Menace is a slightly higher aspect kite. It's a great kite, you know, for the kind of intermediate and above rider. And then the Assault, which for anybody who hasn't flown bow kites or flat kites, it's kind of a new supported leading edge bridle kite that has, as far as for me, has kind of changed the way I view wave riding conditions. You know, when you're on a normal traditional kite, if it's side offshore or anything where there's an offshore in the wind, you tend to get pulled off the back of the waves. And now with these bow kites, you can really spill the power and truly use the power of the wave. So for me, it's opened up a lot of different places to session and different conditions to session in, just based on clean side off or offshore winds.
Well, and I think a lot of the listeners, I mean, you know, they live all over the U.S. Some of them ride waves, but a lot of them are probably interested in, like, how the kite jumps. What kite do you recommend for the guy who wants to go out and boost?
You know, I think as far as the traditional sea kites, the Menace probably has a little bit more boosting ability, just because it's a higher aspect kite, and that's kind of one of the characteristics of them. It's not to say that the M80 doesn't jump. You know, I'd say I ride the M80 a little more. We use it in the school at Rio, and I have a lot of friends that ride it exclusively. And, you know, you'll still see the guys out there 20, 30 feet in the air easy on those kites. And as far as the bow kites go, I think, you know, they have a lot of lift and can get you up there. And then the other benefit of those is they have a much larger wind range per size than, you know, a traditional C-shaped kite. And so that, as far as somebody buying or setting up a quiver, you know, they kind of can get away with a few less kites by going with the bow kites.
Well, and you live the dream. You just got back from British Virgin Islands. You traveled to Antigua. You travel all over the place. And, you know, like, what's next on your agenda for, you know, this season?
As far as this season, I basically left my house November 1st, and other than a few days before Christmas, didn't get back until March 1st. So I just got off of, you know, almost 5 months straight of traveling. You know, so for right now, just kind of getting back into the season and spending some time at home. Also, the Liquid Force kite designer, Julian Fillon, was just here and is coming back next week for a few weeks. So we kind of work on new products for the upcoming year every spring. So focusing on that, trying to get, you know, the new Liquid Force kites and bars and accessories all dialed in for '07. And I think the next thing travel-wise is Moy Gold and possibly Davey Blair, two of the other Liquid Force team riders, and I are going to do a little European tour with some of the Liquid Force distributors over there, and that's going to be hopefully sometime in July. So that's, as far as the next bit of travel, that's kind of next on my list. And then hopefully in August, maybe a bit of a, you know, wave kiting trip. I'm not quite sure where yet. We're going to try to watch the conditions, and I'm going to pick some people's brains that have been to, you know, Indo and different parts of the South Pacific and see where the best place is to go.
Well, I ran into you in Puerto Rico when you were on a layover coming back from the British Virgin Islands, and I know you guys were down there, the whole real entourage, and you were doing some filming and shooting photos, so why don't you talk a little bit about that trip?
Yeah, man, I had almost like a dream come true trip in the BVIs or British Virgin Islands this winter. Like I mentioned before, Real Kiteboarding does a yearly photo shoot trip and kind of gear testing trip this year, which we also added in filming an instructional DVD. We've been doing a series of instructional DVDs based on our instructional camps. We went down to the BVIs to film the Joyride video and the surf video. And also, you know, we took our team photographer and Surfer Magazine photographer John Bilderback and his wife Alexis Bilderback along with us, along with Brian Casario shooting video as well, and just had a killer time. You know, we had three sailboats, two 50-foot single-hull sailboats, and a 47-foot catamaran through a charter company called the Moorings, and just had an insane time. We cruised around with maybe almost a dozen people or more, maybe up to 14 people, I think, at one point, on the three boats, just hitting the different islands and, you know, riding some flat water spots, a ton of different wave spots, and just really lucked out. We had wind and waves and sunshine almost every day out of the 2-week trip we were there, and then I kind of went on a little hiatus and stayed down for an extra couple weeks with some friends, and then did some instruction as well.
Well, and
then caught up with you on a random layover in Puerto Rico, which was fun.
Well, and I was just going to say, and then before that, you were in Barbados, and you actually did some video, our very first video cast with Greg Teco Neco and Dre, and why don't you talk a little bit about that, man?
Yeah, we kind of went back to back right before I went to the BVIs. Spent the month of January in Barbados with Andre Phillip, Sam Bell, and Greg Teco Neco. We had kind of arranged to go down there. Mainly, the three of us, Dre, Sam, and myself, went down to do some riding, training, and shooting down there, and surfing when there wasn't any wind. And then Teco came down to kind of document the whole thing, photo and video-wise, and had also hooked up with you right before coming down on doing the ASnews.net video cast. So that was a kind of a cool focus while we were there, and something different to get involved with, which ended up turning out really well and being really fun. Unfortunately, Teco was only one person, so mainly when we were kiting, we were shooting still photos, and then the video that we got was kind of us and some friends down there surfing the different spots of the island. But we had a great time, and I know it's got a lot of downloads on the ASnews.net site.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, that's the thing. I mean, the video cast that you did, you know, I mean, there was a little bit of kiting in there, but more importantly,